I teach at American University. As you might know, DCLERA is a chapter of the Labor and Employment Relations Association, which is a multi-partite organization with labor management, academics, others who are interested in the workplace. It has existed since 1947, although it was originally the Industrial Relations Research Association. We're called Lera now. Today, I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Mindy Reiser, who will in turn introduce our distinguished guest, Mr. Anton Hajjar, Vice Chairman of the U.S. Postal Service Board of Governors. I will post detailed bios in the chat. Actually, Emily or Bernadette will do that in a moment. Dr. Mindy Reiser is a senior social scientist with extensive experience in research, communications, training and evaluation, working with government agencies, the corporate sector, academic institutions, NGOs, and foundations. Her areas of focus encompass education, health, human services, economic development, and peace building. Go ahead, Mindy.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. We're glad that you're taking the time to be with us and to hear a wonderful range of questions and challenges about the U.S. Postal Service. We are really fortunate to have Anton Hajjar speak to us. I can't think of anyone better placed to give us an overview. As we already heard from David, Anton is a member of the U.S. Postal Service Board of Governors. He was appointed by President Biden, and he was confirmed by the Senate on May 28th, 2021. His term will expire on December 8th, 2023. And on January 12th of this year, he was unanimously elected by his fellow members of the Board of Governors to serve as vice chairman, which is a very strong vote of confidence. He serves on the board's compensation and governance and operations committees, and he has previously served as General Counsel of the American Postal Workers Union. So he has seen the work of the U.S. Postal Service from a variety of perspectives. I must quickly say APWU is part of the AFL-CIO. Before this, he represented unions and workers while serving as counsel at Murphy Anderson. And he was also a principal at O'Donnell, Schwartz, and Anderson. He also served as an advisor and pro bono attorney in employment discrimination cases, including those of Arab and Muslim Americans, particularly following September 11th. He continues to serve as a legal advisor to the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. He was elected to the governing board of the American Law Institute in 2010 and was an advisor to the ALI Employment Law Project. Anton is a graduate of Fordham University and Tulane University Law School. Following law school, he served as a law clerk for a judge with an absolutely extraordinary name for his profession. The judge's name was Judge Minor Wisdom of the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. And now that you know a little bit about Anton, the floor is his.
Thank you very much, Mindy. It's obviously an honor and a pleasure to be here and to be back, because I attended many of the Lera events when they were also on Zoom, but when they were in person, and always had a very nice lunch that went along with it, and got to sit with you, which was a great pleasure, because before I became a governor of the Postal Service, I was a union lawyer, not only for the postal workers, but a number of unions. And interestingly, the Senate just confirmed 2 new governors. One of them is Dan Tangieri, who was I think, deputy mayor under Mayor Fenty. So I may have to talk to him about some of our interactions involving municipal workers when I represented Washington Teachers Union and AFSCME District Council 20 and some other organizations. Anyway, what I'm most grateful for is that you published a 10-year-old photo of me, and you didn't do something that is more current. So thank you for that. Now, I will start with slide 2, which is the usual disclaimer. I'm not here on behalf of the Postal Service. I'm not here on behalf of anybody but myself. But because we're governors, we are actually the constitutional officers of the Postal Service. So like we are the boss. And therefore, as my young daughter used to say when she was a child, I'm the boss of myself. So I guess I'm the boss of myself and I'm allowed to be here because I want to be here. And so anyway, so you know though, that I'm not speaking on in any official capacity. The governors, as I said, are the constitutional officers. Under the Constitution, no executive agency is permitted without some accountability to the president. And we 9 governors were nominated and by the president and confirmed by the Senate. So we are the constitutional officers of the Postal Service. So what is the Postal Service? Under the statute, the Postal Service is an independent establishment of the executive branch of the government of the United States. What does that mean? I don't know. It means, I guess, we're kind of in and out. We're a government agency, without a doubt. The employees of the Postal Service are civil service federal employees, but we're independent, which means that the president cannot direct the Postal Service to do anything. And in fact, there are a number of executive orders that the president issues that would seem to affect the Postal Service, but technically, at least in the opinion of the Postal Service, they're not binding on the Postal Service. Now, the power of the federal government to have a post office actually predated the Constitution of the United States. It was the Articles of Confederation. And the first Postmaster General, as everyone knows, I think, was Ben Franklin. And the Postmaster General was part of the cabinet, and the Postal Service was entirely, just like any other government agency, part of the federal government and part of the political process. Now, if you go to slide 3 briefly, there you see the governing structure of the Postal Service. As I mentioned, no more than 5 of the 9 governors belong to any one party, because we're supposed to be independent of politics, above politics. All right. And so therefore, people ask, why can't President Biden fire Postmaster General DeJoy? The answer is because only the governors can do that. We hire the Postmaster General, and then when we do that, and by the way, of course, he was the Postmaster General before I ever got there in May, but the governors hire the Postmaster General. He then joins the Board of Governors, and we can select a Deputy Postmaster General. So we can go to the next slide, which would be 3, I guess. Or is it? No, slide 4. Slide 4. All right. What is the Postal Service? This is the mission, the statutory mission of the Postal Service. I won't read it all. I think it's awfully is lovely language for a statute and very eloquent statement of what our mission is. And what I will point out to you here for later reference is that its mission is to bind the country together through the personal, education, literary, and business correspondence of the people, right? Correspondence of the people. That at the time means letters, not packages. The other part of this mission of the Postal Service is the universal service obligation, and that involves delivering to every household in the United States, every delivery business and household in the United States, 6 times a week, sometimes 7 times a week, regardless if you have 1 piece or 20 or 30 pieces of mail. We do it every day without regard to the volume, the density, or even the profitability of doing that. Now, if you go to the next slide, we have I wanted to give you some idea of the vastness of this organization. It's huge. And you see the data on the screen, and I want to point out bullet 2 serves 163.1 million addresses. The importance of that for what I'm about to tell you is that number keeps growing, but mail volume keeps declining. So if you go on to slide 6, you see again, the vastness, 31,330 retail offices. There are communities in the United States where the United States flag flies there only because there's a post office there. So if you go on to the next slide, and I guess this would be particularly pertinent to this organization, the labor and employment focus of this organization. We have a workforce, a vast workforce there of over 516,000 career employees and another 136.5 non-career employees. And every 2 weeks, the Postal Service pays out $2.15 billion in salary and benefits, and is the backbone of a huge mailing industry. I know people sometimes use that word that I never use for that kind of mail that goes into your box that you may not actually read. Very important for the Postal Service because it brings in a lot of revenue, and it's actually an important industry in the nation. So if you go on to the next slide, I want to tell you about how the Postal Service came about. It used to be the Post Office Department. And as I told you, the Postmaster General was part of the Cabinet of the United States. And it was also a huge source of patronage in the United States. But things were getting bad and getting worse. And so Congress, as I say, set wages, postage rates, investment, everything Congress had to do. And Congress was not always right on the ball in doing that. And so certainly wages and benefits started falling behind. And there was nothing much the employees could do about it except lobby, which, as I say, is sometimes called collective begging. And working conditions were horrible. There were no opportunities really for career advancement. And it took 21 years within a grade to reach the top of that grade. So what happened after that? The next slide will tell you what happened. the Great Postal Strike of 1970. 290,000 postal employees walked off the job, and delivery of the mail ceased. And the president at the time, President Nixon, declared a national emergency and called out the military. And I know from firsthand, because I had neighbors who were in the National Guard in my neighborhood, who went to the post office because they were mobilized to deliver the mail, and they played cards all day because they had no idea how to do it. So if you go on to the next slide. Unlike Ronald Reagan, who fired the air traffic controllers who went on strike, the striking was it still is illegal for federal employees, including postal store employees. The Nixon administration made a deal brokered by the AFL-CIO to end the strike. And you see the deal was reached on April 2nd, 1970, involved substantial pay raises. I think it was like 8% and then 6%, a big pay raise. A reduction in the progression in the salary schedule to 8 years from 21 years. I mentioned that was a real sticking point with the postal workers. In turn for the union's support for reform legislation and an agreement that wages and benefits would be negotiated with the unions through using the National Labor Relations Act. And the effective date of the postal reorganization was August 12, 1970. This was huge. I mean, for the federal government to give up all that power and all that patronage and get the Postal Service launched as something independent of the federal government was really a sea change in federal policy. And what you need to know about the national negotiations under the National Labor Relations Act, which I'm sure many of, probably everybody's familiar with, only federal employees who negotiate under the National Labor Relations Act are the postal employees, with a few wrinkles, and I'll get into them. And the part of what the PRA did is brought forward the universal service obligation of the Postal Service, but also the postal monopoly. The postal monopoly is the monopoly over letter mail and the mailbox. Only the Postal Service can use mailboxes, and the monopoly is for letter mail, because if you have to go to every address and every delivery point in the United States, whether it's profitable or not, no business would do that. So the economists call that a natural monopoly. And so the financial backbone of the Postal Service was the monopoly on letter mail. So that's in 1970. If you go to the next slide. I want to point out the second bullet on that. That is, one of the purposes of the postal reorganization was to remove the Postal Service from politics and have it operate more like a business, not exactly like a business, but more like a business. So the Postal Service was exempt from many laws, like the laws, it could do its own system of accounting. It had its own investment policy. It was exempt from all labor civil service rules with a few wrinkles there. Exempt from civil service rules, and it could set its own labor policy, wages and benefits and so forth, with the exception, and this was part of the agreement with the unions in the strike, employees are, postal employees are covered by the civil service retirement system. They're also covered by the civil service health benefits system, but that is negotiable. The Postal Service and the unions could negotiate that away, but civil service retirement is in the law and it can't be negotiated away. All right, next slide. Now, the one of the wrinkles in the labor relations regime is that post employees, the prohibition on strikes continued. So how are wages and benefits set? Is set through interest arbitration. Essentially, when we cannot reach an agreement voluntarily, we go to an interest arbitrator, and the arbitrator then basically writes for us. I was involved in many of them before I switched sides and became a governor, and so that is massive litigation. I mean, it's a battle of economists. And the other thing is that the Postal Service is supposed to be self-supporting, not supposed to be going for subsidies to Congress every year or go, because that was what caused the problem in the first place. So let me I'm going to pause here and I'm going to preview to you where we are. Okay, the problems of the Postal Service, in a nutshell, are that because delivery points keep expanding, but mail volume, particularly letter mail, which, as I said, the backbone of the finances of the Postal Service, keep declining. We have a cyclical decline. This is a phenomenon, and it will not reverse itself. I remember doing an interest arbitration, and the Postal Service was saying email was a competitor of first-class mail. And economists will tell you, no, it's not a competitor, because there is no price of postage that the Postal Service could lower it to that would make you not send the email and put your correspondence in the mail instead. I think there are good reasons to send it in the mail, because I think email's kind of beyond its useful capacity. And if you really want to get someone's attention today, I think it makes sense to send them a letter. But in any event, it's not really a competitor. It's really an economic cyclical decline. So how do we become self-supporting and self-sustaining? And in the past, the management's approach was to cut services, close post offices, and aggressively attack the wages and benefits of postal workers with the constant claim that we are, I'm not we, did I say we? I mean they are overpaid. And so what we have now is the Delivery for America plan, and I'm going to get into some of that detail. It's a different approach. It calls for investment in employees. That is a promise of a career, and not an aggressive effort to undermine wages and benefits and working conditions, because in today in the economic situation we find, in labor economic situation we find ourselves in now, it's a way to attract and retain workers with the promise of a career. And during the last peak season, I think the Postal Service did a lot better job because they definitely are able to attract and retain employees with the promise of a career. The comparability standard is in the statute. What do you compare postal workers to for the purpose of wages and benefits? Nobody knows. So the purpose of the plan is investments in employees, investments in equipment, investments in facilities. That facilities are deteriorating, just like they were in the 70s and in 1970, deteriorating facilities. We have postal vehicles that are over 30 years old. They were called long life vehicles, LLVs, and they lived up to their name because they're pieced together and on literally on their last reel, so to speak. So investments in those things to achieve financial self-sufficiency, but by relying heavily on package. And remember that the monopoly does not cover package delivery. So it's a very competitive market, but that's where the growth is, and that is where the Postal Service is going in its 10-year plan to compete for package volume and to win that competition. Now this plan has risks, it has critics, but it's the only plan around to reverse the Postal Service's decline. The alternative is government subsidies, which has little or no support in Congress, having to go to Congress for money in every fiscal appropriation cycle would return the Postal Service to the problems it faced in the 1970s, which led to the Great Postal Strike and the passage of postal reform in 1970, which, as I said, removed the Postal Service from politics and charged it to operate more like a business. Now, if you'll go to the slide 13, these are the principal unions. The American Postal Workers was a merger of several unions. The National Association of Letter Carriers is the largest of the postal unions. You have the National Rural Mail Handlers Union that does what the name implies, and the National Postal Mail Handlers Union, which you don't really run into them much because they work in the plants along with the clerks in these enormous like factories, really, processing, sorting, and preparing the mail for delivery. You go on to the next slide. This is an interesting statistic. The Postal Service is an open shop. No one is required to pay dues. No one is required to pay a service fee or a fair share fee or any of that. Yet the Postal Service has maintained, the postal unions have maintained approximately 85% voluntary membership rate. Unfortunately, those of you who are lawyers know about the Janus decision of the Supreme Court striking down fair share laws in the states, and the Supreme Court cited against the unions this statistic that you don't need fair share for voluntary membership. If you do a good job, people will join. There's lots of reasons why that's wrong, but I won't go into them now. And the Postal Service is and remains extremely labor intensive. If you go on to the next slide, this is I think, terribly. Historically and today, the Postal Service's great social achievement is its employment of minorities, women, and veterans who are subject to the Veterans Preference Act, and the many veterans work for the Postal Service as well. And I think this is an admirable picture of diversity in the Postal Service, and most, I would say, many leaders, minorities, who talk about their past. It's often someone in the family before them who got a job in the post office that started them onto life in the middle class. If you go on to the next slide. So you see some of the other statistics of the Postal Service's employment of women, of veterans, and employees with disabilities, including people, disabled veterans. All right. So I'll go on to the next slide. And here is the root of our problem. It's the Postal Accountability and Enhancement Act, PAEA of 2006. At that point, the Postal Service was at its peak of volume. At that point, the Postal Service was actually in the black, right? And so Congress decided to do several things. It put a CPI cap on market-dominant products. What are market-dominant products? Mail, letter mail, marketing mail, and the like. And of course, putting a CPI cap is a backward-looking thing, and it caused the Postal Service great financial difficulties. Competitive products, you're really basically talking about packages there. And we have a lot more authority to price our products, packaged products, with the exception that it can't be priced below its cost. A lot of controversy over that, and the UPS and FedEx, they're in at the Postal Regulatory Commission arguing that the Postal Service's manner of attributing costs is unfair competition, but the Postal Regulatory Commission makes sure that when the Postal Service sets its prices for packages, that it does not set them below the cost of the service. But the wiggle room in there, the controversy is institutional cost, because as I said, we have an entire network that the Postal Service has to maintain, and that's for all of its products. And so as I say, there's another thing I should mention under the PAEA, which is called negotiated service agreements. And the Postal Service is free to negotiate its prices with private companies, like FedEx and UPS historically have been some of the biggest customers of the Postal Service, as well as competitors of the Postal Service, because what they don't want to deliver, they put it in the mail. And so the Postal Service is free to negotiate negotiated service agreements with them. They're highly confidential. And when the last president was claiming that the Postal Service was giving away the store on its pricing for Amazon, frankly, nobody, he didn't, and nobody knew what the negotiated service agreement contained, but the Postal Regulatory Commission does and approves it, because you can't lose money. You must cover your costs. So next slide. So the other big noose around our neck was a requirement to prepay retiree health benefits. No other federal agency, no government, no private sector company was required to do that. And that became a huge financial burden on the Postal Service. So what happened then? Volumes began to decline. If you go on the next slide, you can see the PAEA fiscal year 2007 and volumes declined. And why have they declined? Well, you have email, you have that. Also, you had the Great Recession that happened right after that, that really took a big hit, that the Postal Service took a big hit on volume and never really recovered from it. So if you go on to the next, I want to mention one more thing about the PAEA. It also forbade the Postal Service to go into any line of business or any product that it didn't do at that time. So there's lots of talk about postal banking, for instance, and other kinds of things that the Postal Service might do. We can't unless Congress changes the law, the PAEA, that forbids it. So there you see the postal debt in 2006. We're in the blue or the black, if you will, and it's losses since then. And if you go on to the next slide, what do we do about it? Well, we have the Delivery for America plan. And two aspects of it that you're probably familiar with is to meet or exceed 95% on-time delivery across all its products, mail, packages, everything, and to achieve a positive net income in 2023 or 2024. And if you go to the next slide, there's the link. You all can read it for yourself. It's there. It's management holds itself accountable to that. We hold management accountable to that. They said they can, management can achieve positive financial situation by the end of 2023 and 2024. And I guess we shall see. But as I said, the key to this plan are investments rather than cutbacks. So you can see up on that slide, IT is so important. I mean, the Postal Service I did a tour of the Eagan, Minnesota computer center. And it's unbelievable. It's second only to the Defense Department. It's a gigantic operation. And it has its own power plant because it doesn't want to rely on the municipal power. And it has a whole backup of batteries in case their own power plant goes down. It's quite enormous, but it's where the action is in terms of upgrading the Postal Service. $2 billion for technology upgrades. You go to the next slide. As I said, instead of attacking employees and their wages and benefits, this plan invests in employees by holding out the promise of a career. And I would suggest to you that the Postal Service won the battle in the last year or two on labor shortages with offering a career to employees and they've done the Postal Service, as you see in the final bullet, the Postal Service converted nearly 63,000 pre-career employees. These are the non-career employees. They came into the collective bargaining agreement right around the time of the recession. Postal Service is in such bad financial condition at the time that I think we were like 2 payrolls from not being able to pay people's salaries. But now the idea is not is to invest in these employees so that they look forward to having a career with the Postal Service. So if you go on to the next slide. Point 2, I have a lot of experience with that. Collective bargaining, when I was a union lawyer, we were dealing with mutual promises. The Postal Service asked for certain concessions and made certain promises. The concessions were in the contract. The promises were a battle to get the Postal Service to comply with the collective bargaining agreements. This Delivering for America plan, you look it up, it says right there in black and white, that part of the plan is to comply with union contracts. Go on. Is this the answer? I don't know. It kind of inverts the priorities, or it really looks to have the Postal Service take advantage of the opportunities of package delivery in a way to help with the problem with declining mail volume, that is letter mail volume. Another reason the Postal Service changed its service standards, and I spoke against it at an open meeting, but I will give you the rationale. The rationale is air transportation is expensive and unreliable. One of the largest of the Postal Service's air carriers is FedEx. And when things get tight, FedEx puts their stuff in front and puts Postal Service in the back. So the idea is to put as much mail as possible on ground transportation, but there's a driver shortage, there may be a vehicle shortage. Things can happen, and this is one of the things that can happen. Inflation, we know. Back when I was a union lawyer, the Postal Service would come in every year saying there's no inflation, take your COLA clause out of the contract. The unions never would, and I guess right now they're glad they didn't, because there are COLA clauses in the union contracts, and inflation is a challenge right now. We go on to the next slide. So part of the Delivering for America plan was, like I said, quid pro quo. We need financial assistance and relief from this pre-funding, and we got it. And what I think is most remarkable about this slide is look at the bipartisan vote, both in the House and the Senate. You don't see a lot of that these days. In this case, it happened. Next slide. So this is what it does. It provides relief from the retiree health benefits prepayment. That's important for the bottom line. It's not necessarily that important for, well, I'll be careful what I say. Postal Service has defaulted on those payments in the past, and so now we don't have to pay it going forward. Medicare integration is extremely important. Postal employees pay into Medicare. Postal Service pays into Medicare. But postal employees are not required to take Medicare when they retire. This current employees are going to be grandfathered. It gets a little complicated about when each level kicks in, but in general, Medicare integration will make Medicare primary and the postal medical insurance secondary, and that is a huge help to us on our bottom line. Now, 6-day delivery used to be a rider on appropriations bills. We would get little bits of compensation from the government, things with like free mail, different kinds of services, and
I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. The integrated network is important because, as I was saying, all of these products are going to move in the same network, and mail and packages in this integrated network. We're allowed to give services, provide services to state and local governments, but that's all. So as I told you, the PAEA would not allow the Postal Service to go into other lines of business. And for those who experience delays and problems with their mail, Postal Service will be required to post a dashboard of service by zip code. So if you go on to the next slide. Election mail was pretty controversial. I suggest to you the Postal Service did a very good job on election mail, and even the Inspector General of the Postal Service said so. And the data is right there for you to see. If you do that, go to the next slide, please. So we have an election mail committee, and the chair of that committee is Amber McReynolds. She's a national expert on election mail, and so this is a big priority for the Postal Service. The Postal Service has done and will do a good job on election mail. Next slide. Can someone tell me how I'm doing on time here? Let me quickly talk about electric postal vehicles. Very much in the news. Postal Service been criticized for putting a plan of 10% electric versus 90% gas powered. That's not really acceptable to anybody. It's not acceptable to me. The problem is financing. We also would have to deploy an infrastructure for a charging infrastructure. And the Postal Service cannot sell float bonds or sell stock to raise money. We have to borrow money from the federal bank. And there is a statutory limit on our borrowing authority. We're close to it. We have to file a document with the that the SEC, we're not governed by the SEC, but we do have to file a 10Q, and you can see the data in there about our financial constraints in terms of funding more electric vehicles. If you go to the next slide. Well, we're being sued. There's 3 lawsuits pending. I'm hoping that some of Build Back Better slides, because there's 6 billion in it for us to increase the electrification of the fleet. Next slide. Train service standards. All I would say about that is, like I said, I was against it. It was enacted before I got there, but the rationale of the Postal Service is that patrons prefer reliability over speed. 1 day, 2 days, as long as you know you're going to get your mail on a certain day, 95% of the time, then the Postal Service thinks that that is a better plan, and it simply can't meet the service standards if it's going to try to transition transportation to surface transportation. And besides, the Postal Service for years hasn't met its service standard anyway, so it was a bit fraudulent. So, do I have any more slides? Is that it?
Okay.
There are a couple more slides. Do you want me to go through them for you, Anton?
Let me.
Looks like there's 4.
Yeah, go on to, yeah. Next one is just very briefly. Privatization, there are claims that there are plans to privatize the Postal Service. Not true. It's in our mission statement. It was promulgated by the Board of Governors. There's no plans to privatize the Postal Service. Finally, rate increases. Yeah, the first class stamp is going to go up. It's the next slide. From 58 to 60 cents. But if you go to the next slide, we're down around the cheapest postage in the world. So I think it's still a good one if it's 60 cents for a letter. So finally, the last slide is about the COVID test kit deliveries. It was excellent, did a very good job on it. And it was just announced that 8 more are available. You go on the Postal Service's website or any even the newspapers, you'll see how you can order 8 more tests delivered to your home through the Postal Service. I'm done.
Okay, this has been absolutely fascinating. And as I've written in the chat, you can access the slides in a couple of ways. There's someone that you can email at USPS who can send them to you, and they're also available through the chat. We actually have not had that many questions. One question was about postal workers being eligible for FERS.
Well, FERS, I think that's the Civil Service Retirement System, and they are eligible. They participate in FERS.
Okay, they do that. Someone asks about the competition from Amazon in terms of packages, which you've indicated is an area the Postal Service increasingly focuses on. Do you want to say anything more about that kind of?
Yeah, the Postal Service has a new part of the Delivering for America plan is called USPS Connect, and it is going to be focusing on local businesses for even same day or next day or 2-day delivery, depending on the geography. If you have your packages ready to go, and that is going to be so many of these businesses don't want to pay this premium to Amazon so that they can get rapid delivery. If you wait 1 day or 2 days to get your stuff, you shouldn't. These businesses shouldn't have to pay all this premium to Amazon to be on Amazon or Amazon Prime. But as I mentioned, that Amazon will never deliver to every single address in the United States. Only the Postal Service does that.
Okay, one thing that fascinates me is the wide range of people who come to work for the U.S. Postal Service. Can you say a bit more about the training that will be offered to them? There's a hope that people will make the Postal Service their career. What kinds of training and education will the Postal Service provide so that people can advance in a career in terms of technology, in terms of management? What is the thinking now?
Well, the Postal Service has a very robust training program. As we become more and more automated, you have more and more need for people to have higher skills. Certainly, maintenance is a big deal, and there's a whole training center for maintenance employees in Norman, Oklahoma, and the Postal Service is also focusing on getting elevating and training its supervisory ranks. And one thing that is characteristic of the Postal Service is that there is people move up within it. I mean, several postmasters general started out as clerks of letter carriers. So the Postal Service promotes and trains from within, and I haven't heard complaints that that training has been inadequate.
Okay, we're getting close to our time, but we have to say something about stamps. I'm sure a number of folks participating today have collected stamps. We go to the post office, we look and see the latest commemoratives. Can you say something about that process? Also, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a great stamp collector. He even designed stamps. So where do we go with the future of stamp design and the wonderful outreach now to various ethnic and cultural worlds to put forward names for people to be honored in stamps?
Yeah, there's an independent group that decides both on who will be featured or what will be featured in a commemorative stamp, and the art that goes into it. So I can't say too much about that, except to say that I'm scheduled to dedicate the Pete Seeger commemorative stamp at the Folk Festival in Newport in July, and that will be fun.
Okay. I also want to have people understand that post offices are also repositories of American art and history, with some post offices featuring wonderful murals. And this is a part of American life and American culture. And I hope there's some plan to restore some of these murals and to make sure that historic post offices don't hit the dust and still continue to be out there and figures of importance in cultural life.
Yeah, Mindy, that's that it's true. We had a board meeting at Minneapolis. It's a glorious post office, and everyone should go and see it, but it's just really not very well suited for mail processing today. So yeah, we should try to preserve that, but we also need to have plants laid out in a certain way that will actually be efficient for mail processing.
Yeah, I understand that. Ruth Schimmel asked something that I think some of us certainly face, that bills come to our mailbox and we find that the payment is due within a few days of our receiving them. I'm not sure if the post office can do anything about that. It may be that the organization that is billing us sends the mail out late, or somehow it just takes more time. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, what I'm gonna say is that I get these emails from banks and that saying, "Oh, the Postal Service is terrible. Pay directly to us online," and I don't necessarily want to accuse them of putting the squeeze on people so that they'll make that switch over to electronic bill payment. But during the last peak, not the last, the one before, really serious problems of people ending up having to pay penalties to IRS and others when their checks did not get there on time. We're very aware of that. I'm on that every board meeting. We have to, once you publish a service standard, you have to meet that service standard. If I say one more thing, 95% on time leaves 5% that's not on time, right? And that's a lot of people. So there'll always be difficulty. There'll always be some people who are not on time, even with a 95% goal.
Okay, well, Anton, I think this has been absolutely fascinating. The U.S. Postal Service is a national treasure. It's had its challenges, it continues to have, but it affects every single one of our lives. That is, I can say with certainty. Do you want to say anything as a final word or two, and then we'll go back to David for a word or two from him?
All I want to say is that I love the Postal Service. I've dealt with it since the 80s when I started everything. People love the Postal Service, and it's very, very important that people, that the Postal Service maintain the goodwill of the American people and not give up on. So when people have problems, I say complain. We don't improve if there's no complaints. So stay with it, stick with it, and we do our best to meet your expectations.
Okay, in the chat, we're getting some very nice comments about your presentation, Anton. David, do you want to say a word about our next program? Folks, consider joining DCLERA, suggesting programs. It's a great organization, and we get wonderful people like Anton to come and speak to us.
Thank you so much, Mindy, for moderating, and thank you so much, Anton, for presenting. We all really care about the post office because it unites the country as no other institution does. Thank you for your work on that. I do want to say a few things about DCLERA. I want to thank Emily Smith and Bernadette Tiemann for their piloting this whole process from behind the scenes. It's very helpful. Always it's helpful to have help from a national organization. Please note that DCLERA's next event will be at the ILO involving 9 to 5 Karen Nussbaum, June 22nd in the evening. There will be details about that forthcoming. And as Mindy said, please consider joining DCLERA and Lera at dclera.org and leraweb.org. So thank you very much for coming. Have a great day. It's about time to check the mail. So
Right. Say hello to your delivery person.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you
Bye-bye.
later.